This is TechStrong TV.
Hi everybody, we are back here in Chicago at the great conference, KubeCon. It's a lot of great fun, great people we're talking to. The showroom is buzzing. I mean, it's kind of days of old here, so it's great to see things are back and big and a lot of fun. So great conversation we're having here with some friends from OpsMx. We're talking a little bit about what OpsMx does and dig into some new announcements. David Greene, CRO, and Gopal, what is your last name, Gopal?
Dommety, Gopal Dommety.
And great, well, why don't you start out by talking about what OpsMx is?
Yeah. So, Mitch, we started OpsMx with the vision to fully automate and secure software delivery. That's our vision. There are developers, there is sort of production, and so we, as people are going into Kubernetes and microservices, we realize that automating the delivery and the deployments is a lot of manual task, and we said we should bring intelligence to secure that delivery and deployment aspect. Now with the executive mandate, software supply chain, that's kind of become very, very important.
Yeah.
And so we provide like a deployment firewall, that's what we provide. Most of our customers are like large enterprises. We have some that are small and medium. They tend to have large deployments, Fortune 10 kind of customers. That's what OpsMx.
And mostly deployment into the cloud, or can be private data center too? Or?
Deployment into, both cloud and private data centers.
Okay.
We have in large Kubernetes environments, we deploy into OpenShift, and that's it.
And you mentioned, of course, supply chain security. I mean, there are security requirements, standards, et cetera, but every organization kind of has their own thing, right? You got to adapt.
It's a huge focus right now, right? I mean, if you look at the work around the supply chain, there's generally been two areas of focus. There's been a lot of focus on the production environment when stuff's already running in the real world, or in the developers. But there hasn't been any work to connect those two, and that's really what we're focused on showing here today at KubeCon, is this idea of how do we start to get really an end-to-end view of that application lifecycle from when the developer starts to code, when that code lands into production, right? We're showing our booth, Gopal mentioned the deployment firewall. That's a new capability we just announced a couple of weeks ago that's designed to do automated compliance and policy enforcement as part of software delivery process. Right, so as the release is running through its various approvals and stages and reviews, be able to do that check before it goes into the environment to make sure that you've got your security checks, you understand your security posture, you've got the approvals you need, the environment's ready for it, all those other things you want to make sure are done before you actually put that code out in the wild.
Yeah, usually is that last gate, right?
You've
got to go through.
Last gate.
We've done everything that you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Got the results we need to see.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody pushes the button or whatever they do.
Now it's live, right?
Exactly. It's a last comprehensive gate that makes sure the code, the process, the people, the delivery, and the deployment, all 5 of them have kind of happened, and we are tested.
When you mentioned working with enterprises, some of those deployments I can imagine are pretty complex, right?
Yes.
You know, you're in this cloud, that cloud, Kubernetes here, and something
one
else.
of everything, yes.
I can only imagine some of the issues you might deal with. As you work with customers to kind of figure out how to adapt to that, what are some things you've learned about what they need that you put into the product?
Yes, so you're right. There are lots of deployment targets. Like, some of our customers have 20, 30, and hundreds of target Kubernetes clusters. Scale, some of our customers have 24 to 9, one of our customers has 90,000 pipelines.
Wow.
Right, at million deployments, and we have people who have 9 pipelines too. Right? I think when you have that scale and speed, any security check, any approval that you need to do from a security point of view just becomes hugely onerous from a time sort of a people point of view. So we built in ability to fully automate gates based on that application security graph that we have, the end-to-end security graph, which if you think about it at scale and speed, at that scale and speed, it's super hard to keep it fresh. Right? So we build the ability to gate. We also, audit is a big sort of issue, especially when you need to audit at that scale. We build that in. Policy enforcement, like you said, that last gate, needs a lot of checks. And sometimes you will be surprised, even large enterprises have very not so security enriched processes, like just changing a certain artifact can push you to production. We built in sort of the deployment firewall actually has come into being after actually working with our customers at scale.
And of course, those 9 pipelines or whatever number, they all do things the same way and follow all the rules.
Exactly the
right?
same. Yeah, exactly
That's what I remember working in an enterprise.
Well, 9 is one, but 90,000 is another.
Yeah, I was going to say, more or less, get to 90,000.
I think that's the key about the scale, right? You have to, the whole shift left movement said let everybody do things their way, which was great from a productivity standpoint, the developer side, right? Yeah. But at the end of the day, you've got to have some way of making sure that some minimum set of standards was enforced, right? And so that's where the automation comes in. And I think the other thing which we're showing here at the booth is how we can start to add intelligence to that automation, right? So, let us actually do an evaluation of a new release, compare it to an existing release, and give you a score that says, from a quality or performance or security standpoint, this release looks like it's ready to go, this one doesn't, right? And we can automate policies on that. Start to be able to generate your own rule set that you might need to enforce with that, right? So, the automation plus the intelligence allows you to scale from the 9 to the 90,000 in an environment that's very unique.
So I would imagine, I used to describe when I was running development teams, it's like when we get ready for a release, it's like going on a trip. Yeah. We don't want to get in the RV and find out we left stuff, we got to go turn around and go back, right? So, and that takes preparation. Not just that we think we're ready to release, let's do the final check. It's all those stages before. What kind of things do you do to help customers so when they get to that point, it's ready to go, not we have 2,500, whatever the number is, things we got to go back and do.
Well, one of the things we built into the deployment firewall is the ability to do a preview, to do a simulation check, right? So that a developer who's working on a release can say, great, my release is going to go to this target environment. Let me run a check today and see how it lines up against the rules for that environment, right? And so we're not deploying anything. We're just saying, if you were to deploy, this is where you'd be in good shape, and this is where you'd be out of compliance. Right? So we don't want the call. We don't want the call at 1 a.m. when you're in the deployment cycle to say you forgot something, right?
Yeah. Turn around on that vacation.
Exactly. So we're trying to give that visibility early in the process, right? And with that comes reporting, right? Because if you make it easier to make it visible, people can make decisions. One of the problems is for a developer, you got 20 different tools that each have a different data silo, and you're supposed to check all of them, right? We're aggregating all that data into one view as part of getting this end-to-end perspective, so you could just go one place. If I tell you there's an issue, then you go one place to see what that issue is, and then make a decision on how to act.
Yeah, it seems like too, we often talk about security and automation and processes, which are all fantastic. We might think of it as a byproduct, but actually think some of the essential things is all the data we create in that process is what we can use for, for our audits and for compliance, whether it be security or our own internal processes. So you're not writing documentation at the end, right? I've got the data I can present. So I would imagine that is one of the things you've got to do is not just a screen that says we're ready to go, but here you go. Here's all the information that we need to provide to whoever for our policies and procedures and compliance?
Absolutely. The visibility and the checks is one thing, but the auditability from a compliance point of view is another. Incident response, when you have an incident, to be able to trace back to exactly, like for example, you can go into a pod and say, if this failed, which exact PR went into this pod, and how did it get here?
Yeah.
And we're also looking at enriching the security, like you have all the security vendors with CSPMs and Synapse, so enrich their security graph with this data so that they can do better security response. You're absolutely right, I think.
Very good. And you learn from those things too, right?
Yes, yeah.
Go back and make improvements in the flow.
Yeah, AI/ML has been a big part of our original thesis of starting the company, and
I did want to ask you about that too, because it's one of the topics for
it's mandatory for every interview, right?
So it is. I'm required to bring it up at least
check
42 seconds into the conversation. It's putting AI and ML into our applications and systems and the things that we do, the things we produce. but there's also AI and ML and generative AI that we use on the process of how we create and deliver software. I think one of the particular tricky things about AI, ML, especially generative AI, is like you have to feed data into this. This is not just deploying software and data's generated by someone interacting with it. We're constantly data streams that are going into from multiple sources to feed into these. And so delivering a release isn't just, yes, it's code, but it's also the data content, the data streams that are going into it. How do you account for those kinds
you've been doing some research on that.
Odd things that are a little different?
Yeah, so I think the AI ML is in the delivery process used in many different flavors, right? One flavor could be, which we do, is when you do deployment. During the deployment, we use AI ML to understand the behavioral characteristics of an application and understand if there are any security risks that are being sort of generated during the deployment. That's one area. The other area is, we have this data and we want to be able to predict the policies that you need to have, and also generate the rego or the specification for the policy, and a human can literally say the intent and that generates the policy, because these policies are very application specific, right? And sort of the third area we see a lot of emphasis is that, especially now that you have these vulnerabilities or policy violations or alerts, the root causing of them is being done with a lot of AI now, especially with the generative AI, with OpenAI APIs, right? They're sort of this. So I see it kind of turning our world into a much more efficient world and much more personalized world. I mean, that's how I see. I don't know if I answered your question, but
well, there's also the piece of, I think you're talking a little bit, Gopal, about the deployment process itself, the process of deploying machine learning models. It's fundamentally a deployment process, right? Even though there's now data with the code, it's still fundamentally a delivery and deployment process. It's just as a bigger object, right? And so that's one of the new areas we're working on right now in the project. How do we do that
Mitch,
together?
maybe I've missed the question, but I think yes.
I liked your answer anyway. That's the question, but that's okay.
So I think if you take, I gave you the example of this customer who has this 24,000 pipelines, right? 12,000 of their pipelines are actually AI ML models, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so when you do AI ML models follow the same delivery process, but they have model training, and also the model deviation in production, right? And so
they aren't static things.
Right.
They're static things. They're not static, right? So I think this whole security layer that we have is now we're optimizing it for the ML sort of ops or ML model delivery. And so very interesting sort of challenges that come, even in security, because once you're in production, the behavior of the model could potentially give you a security risk, which was never the case is truly in an application, right? So that's an area that we are being sort of forced, I guess, by customers, because we didn't realize half the pipelines were machine learning models. And so we apply the security layer to that.
Well, that's kind of our industry, right? We don't necessarily know what we're going to be doing.
Exactly.
We have to figure out ways how to
get ready for it.
Right?
Yeah,
it's very interesting. It's a good point about we don't typically deliver a lot of data in our deployment pipelines, right? There's databases in production that we test against and otherwise. In these cases, they're vector databases and
it's still
learning models that we've
adjusted.
And
the complexity of these graphs are very interesting, because you all these models are cascaded. If this model works, this data comes in, the next model works. I mean, it's actually very fascinating for us to be able to apply.
It's almost too complex to do it manually.
You can't do it manually.
You can't do it manually, right? You just can't do it.
I mean, I think across the board here, right? The challenge is, the reflex often is, if we're not sure, we'll have a person do it. But the challenge is the people are so overwhelmed, they lack context, right? And so that's where you've got to rely on some kind of automation intelligence in a system to offload the people. And then you bring the people in on an exception basis when you're really stuck, and they can take the time to really dig in and understand what's happening, right? That's the complementary model we're trying to do.
You're absolutely right. That's a new dimension of delivery that has kind of, in the last 2 years, has really taken off. When you said securing, automating software delivery, that's a new dimension.
Yep.
The models and the data associated with the
Yes.
models.
They didn't think of it. We didn't have that in mind when we started doing CI/CD.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
That's okay. It's adaptable.
Yeah.
So deployment. Anything as you kind of look forward, you're thinking about where you might go or where the industry might go in your domain in the next 6 or 12 months, or what's kind of top of mind of here's the next set of challenges we might look at?
I think the one is driven by, the first challenge is driven by, as an industry, a lot of scale of Kubernetes. The scale of Kubernetes is kind of taking off, right? And so as that scale of Kubernetes takes off, people underestimate the complexity of deployments and securing deployments. And so today, in fact, somebody came to a booth and he asked the exact question, and I asked him, like, how do you know? He said, well, rest of the guys are going to see it 6 to 9 months from now. So I think scale will drive the need for automating security. I think that's one. I think the second is that there are a lot of, as in the software delivery, there are a lot of these tools, security tools that need to be inserted, like, this can, and so on and so forth. I think that we are also seeing a little bit of a consolidation to say, hey, I want the delivery bill of materials for the entire delivery to be understood. I think that's another sort of trend that is just starting, and I think that's the tip of the iceberg. Once we have that delivery bill of materials and this application graph, you can do lots of interesting things, including some generative AI way to understand, how things happen. I mean, it's I think a new frontier that we can hit. But both these we're hoping will make the need for what OpsMx provides, deployment firewall and the delivery bill of materials, etc., ubiquitous, right? I mean, hoping that's kind of that's how we think from first principles as to how the industry and us can probably help.
Interesting. Well, where can folks find out more? Go kick the tires or whatever they do.
We got a couple of, obviously if you're here at KubeCon, we're in booth P14. We've got demos and giveaways happening here. Our website, OpsMx has got more information. For people who want to try out the solution, we've got demo environments, trial environments they can go to kind of see for themselves how this sort of compliance and sandbox might work for themselves, the deployment firewall.
That's one of those things, you kind of have to see it work,
You want to see it work,
really
right? Test drive it, right?
Yeah, that's the way I am. So, that kinetic learning, I want to see it.
We'll sign you up, Mitch.
Absolutely, and feedback for us is most important. We need customers to kind of, kick the tires and make us work hard.
Great. Well, David, Gopal, thank you so much.
Great.
Be sure and check out the OpsMx website and all the great content. If you're here, check out their booth as well. Thank you for joining us for this discussion. We'll be back in a few minutes with another great interview, so hang tight.